The grand hall of the Galactic Council shimmered with the glow of artificial starlight, an architectural marvel suspended in the void of space. Inside, representatives from hundreds of star-faring civilizations gathered in their hovering seats. Their forms varied, some reptilian, others insectoid, a few amorphous masses of bioluminescent energy. Towering over them all sat the High Speaker, a being of crystalline composition whose every movement sent refracted light dancing across the vast chamber. The mood was jovial, the air thick with amusement. A trial was underway, not of law, but of humor. The humans want military recognition, rumbled Warlord Croshan of the Vortide Dominion, a species bred for war, their bodies plated with natural armor, therefore arms always hovering near weapons. He leaned forward, tusked maw splitting into something resembling a grin. They wished to stand among the finest warriors of the known galaxy. He gestured grandly, causing ripples of laughter among the assembled council. Ambassador Kthira, a feathered diplomat from the scholarly Xyrix Collective, clacked her beak. Such an odd request. They barely qualify as an interstellar species. Their ships are crude, their weapons kinetic-based, and their soldiers, she tilted her head, eyes gleaming with intellectual pity. Flesh and bone unaugmented. Their genetic code is riddled with inefficiencies. Another wave of laughter followed, echoed even by the more neutral members of the council. The consensus was clear. Humans were a novelty, not a serious addition to the galactic military order. Then, the lone human representative, Ambassador Elias Carter, rose from his seat. Unlike the towering reptilians, the hulking brutes, or the multi-limbed intelligences present, he was utterly unremarkable in size. A being of soft skin and weary eyes, dressed in the traditional formal wear of his people, practical, understated. Yet there was a stillness to him, the kind found in men who knew battle without needing to boast of it. "Amusing," Carter said, his voice calm, measured. "I understand why you mock us. You see our technology and compare it to yours. You measure our bodies and find us lacking. You hear of our wars and think us primitive." He clasped his hands behind his back. "And yet, history has shown time and time again that underestimation is the surest path to defeat." A few in the audience quieted, recognizing the quiet defiance in his tone. But Croshan snorted, tapping his claws against the stone railing of his seat. "Brave words, little human, but words do not make warriors." "Agreed," Carter said, nodding. "That is why I propose a test." The murmurs of laughter stilled, replaced by curiosity. It was rare for a species to challenge the council's opinion outright. "Go on," the High Speaker intoned, voice echoing like a chime of glass against steel. Carter's gaze remained steady. "We will send one of our finest warriors to face any test of combat you see fit. If they fail, we will withdraw our petition." A moment of silence. Then, amusement returned, but now tinged with intrigue. A test. A spectacle. The council had not had such entertainment in decades. Kthira preened her feathers. "A lone warrior against our best? That is suicide." "Perhaps," Carter allowed, "but that is the nature of humanity. We thrive where we should perish." Croshan leaned forward, intrigued. "Very well, human. We accept your challenge." His grin widened. "Let us see if your bravado is anything more than noise." The decision was made. The trial would be held on the death world of Jorvask, a planet where only the strongest survived. The council would choose a team of elite warriors, augmented, battle-hardened, and drawn from species that had conquered entire worlds. Against them, humanity would send one. That was the agreement, and that was how, days later, Lieutenant Commander Jack Reynolds stood before the council, clad in a simple combat suit, his expression unreadable as he was briefed on the conditions of his trial. He had no enhancements, no cybernetic implants, no energy shielding, no nanite-infused muscles. Just raw human endurance, skill, and a lifetime of training. The moment he entered the arena, a new silence fell over the council. The laughter had stopped, And for the first time, some among them began to wonder. Had they made a mistake? Jorvask was a planet that devoured the unprepared. Its skies swirled with crimson storms. Its forests twisted with razor-edge flora that dripped toxic resin. The ground pulsed with seismic tremors, and the very air was thick with spores that gnawed at the lungs. It was here, in this graveyard of lesser species, that the Galactic Council had chosen to test humanity's worth. Jack Reynolds crouched in the dense undergrowth, his breath steady, his muscles loose. He had been dropped into the heart of this hellscape with nothing but a combat knife, a standard-issue sidearm, and his own instincts. Against him stood 6 of the deadliest warriors the galaxy had to offer. He had memorized their profiles. The first was Kethral, a towering Vortai berserker with 4 arms and an exoskeleton tougher than steel. He would be reckless, eager for a direct fight, predictable. The second, Irixa, was a PHRYNN huntress, her body wiry and covered in camouflaging scales. She would strike from the shadows, silent and patient, dangerous. Then there was Vokrin, the cybernetic enforcer of the Zeldoran Collective, a living machine with reflexes beyond organic limits. Precise, efficient. The others were no less formidable, each an apex predator in their own right. Jack was only human. But humans, he reminded himself, were the most dangerous creatures in the known universe. He moved with practiced silence, slipping through the underbrush. His first kill had to be fast. The moment the others realized he wasn't easy prey, they would adapt. And that could not happen. Kethral was his target. The brute had made the mistake of separating from the others, confident in his own invincibility. Jack watched as the Vortai stalked through the terrain, his massive frame crushing vegetation underfoot. Arrogant, sloppy, Jack struck like a phantom. A burst of movement, a precise slash at the joint of Kethral's secondary arm, where the chitin was weakest. The Vortai roared, swinging wildly, but Jack was already behind him, driving his knife into the exposed nerve cluster at the base of his skull. The berserker collapsed, twitching. 1 down. The kill had been quick, but not quiet. The others would be converging soon. Jack stripped the corpse of its weapon, a plasma-forged blade, heavier than he liked, but useful. He melted back into the jungle. The hunt had begun. An hour passed. Jack moved carefully, using every ounce of training to stay unseen. He set traps, simple ones, designed to maim, not kill. He didn't need to eliminate all of them himself. He just needed to shift the battlefield in his favor. The first trap caught Irixa. She had been moving through the trees, her chameleon-like skin blending with the environment. But Jack had anticipated her approach, weaving tripwires laced with corrosive sap from the local flora. The moment she touched down, the wires snapped, coating her in acid. She shrieked, her cloaking failing as she flailed wildly. A single shot to the head ended her suffering. 2 down. The council watched in stunned silence from their hovering observation chamber. This was not the flailing resistance they had expected. The human was not just surviving. He was hunting. Vokrin changed tactics. He was a strategist among them, the cold machine mind that analyzed and adapted. Jack had studied his kind. Zeldoran enforcers operated on ruthless logic. They would assume control of the situation, and that made them predictable. Jack had placed Kethral's corpse in an open clearing, a baited lure. The moment Vokrin's scanners locked onto it, the enforcer swept in, his mechanical limbs humming with suppressed energy. He bent over the body, scanning for information. Jack struck from above. He had climbed a twisted branch high above, waiting for the exact moment. He dropped onto the enforcer's back, driving his stolen plasma blade through the gaps in the cybernetic plating. Sparks erupted, and Vokrin convulsed, metal and flesh failing together. 3 down. The remaining warriors regrouped. They were beginning to understand the truth. This was no primitive, no unremarkable species fumbling against superior foes. This was something else entirely. Jack was human, and humans never played fair. They tried to flush him out, setting controlled fires to the underbrush, funneling him toward a trap of their own. Jack let them think it was working. He moved as they expected, emerging from the smoke at the designated kill zone. But Jack had already accounted for their positions. He moved before they could fire, rolling to the side, his stolen plasma blade cutting through the leg of one warrior, his sidearm taking down another. He turned the enemy's own cover against them, using their formations to create blind spots. By the time the last warrior realized he was the only one left, Jack was already behind him, pressing the cold barrel of a gun to the base of his skull. 6 down. Silence. The Galactic Council was speechless. The arena, once filled with the snarls and war cries of alien warriors, was now nothing more than a graveyard. And standing alone in the center, unbroken, was a human. Jack flicked blood from his knife, breathing heavily but steady. He looked up, directly at the hovering observation chamber, at the faces of those who had laughed at his kind. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence stretched through the grand hall of the Galactic Council, like the vacuum of space itself. A moment ago, they had watched a human, a lone, unaugmented specimen, eliminate 6 of the galaxy's most feared warriors. Now, they sat frozen in stunned disbelief, processing the reality that had just unfolded before them. Jack Reynolds stood in the center of the blood-soaked battlefield, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, scanning the observation chamber high above. His combat suit was torn, smeared with alien ichor, yet he looked utterly unfazed. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't gloating. He was waiting for their next move. High Speaker Scifi, the ancient crystalline being who presided over the council, had not spoken since the last opponent had fallen. Light pulsed erratically beneath his translucent skin, betraying the struggle within his otherwise inscrutable form. He turned his gaze to Ambassador Elias Carter, the human representative, who stood with his hands clasped behind his back, unreadable as ever. "The trial is complete," Scifi finally said, his voice reverberating through the hall. "Humanity has exceeded expectations." A murmur rippled through the chamber, cautious, uncertain. Some species still sat in stunned silence, their disbelief warring with the undeniable evidence. Others were less composed. Warlord Krashin rose to his full, imposing height, his claws raking against the stone railing of his seat. His eyes burned with rage, but there was something else beneath the fury, something colder. "This proves nothing." His voice was gravel and thunder. "You let a single human best a handful of warriors, and now you believe they deserve a seat among us?" He scoffed. "A fluke, a trick of terrain, and cowards' tactics. Nothing more." Carter didn't flinch. "You call it a fluke. I call it a demonstration." His voice was calm, but there was a sharpened edge beneath it. "A single human against 6 of your best, under conditions of your choosing, and we prevailed." Krashin's tusks twitched. "With deception, with ambushes and dishonorable tactics." Jack finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly from the arena floor. "You assumed I'd fight on your terms. That was your first mistake." He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Your second was thinking war has rules." The warlord let out a low growl, but did not reply. There was nothing to say. From the opposite side of the chamber, Ambassador Kthira of the Zyrex Collective observed the exchange with newfound curiosity. Her feathers fluffed slightly as she addressed the council. Regardless of personal feelings, the results cannot be ignored. She turned her piercing gaze to Scifi. "The purpose of this trial was to test the combat viability of humans. They have not only survived, but demonstrated a level of strategic adaptation that outmatches brute force alone." There was an unspoken shift in the room. Even those who wanted to deny humanity's worth had no ground left to stand on. The evidence was undeniable. Scifi inclined his head. "Then we must discuss the terms of humanity's inclusion." Carter nodded, stepping forward. "Let's talk." For the next hour, the chamber became a battlefield of its own. This time, fought with words instead of weapons. Some factions pushed for full military integration, eager to exploit humanity's potential. Others argued for restricted inclusion, still wary of what they had just witnessed. Krashen, bitter and seething, demanded another trial, but he was swiftly overruled. Jack remained silent throughout, standing in the arena below, listening as his fate and the fate of his species was debated in real time. Then, finally, a decision was reached. Zypher's voice rang out, final and absolute. The Galactic Council formally recognizes humanity as a military-capable species. They will be granted access to select technological resources and offered roles within our cooperative defense forces. His crystalline form pulsed, the weight of the declaration settling over the hall. Earth will hold a provisional seat, pending further evaluations. Carter allowed himself the smallest of smiles. A reasonable start. Jack exhaled slowly, his muscles loosening. It was done. As the chamber erupted into discussion once more, Jack looked up toward Carter, meeting the ambassador's gaze. No words were exchanged, but the understanding between them was clear. This was only the beginning. As Jack turned to leave the battlefield, he felt the eyes of the council on him, some filled with wariness, others with curiosity, and in the case of Krashen, with something else entirely, resentment. Jack knew this victory wasn't the end of the fight. No, this was only the first battle in a much larger war. But if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was proving people wrong.